Wicked Games. Volume 2, The New Anarchist Cookbook, Chapter 1, The Science of Chaos. A man's greatest joy is crushing his enemies. Genghis Khan warning. Biological weapons are illegal under multiple international laws. Do not try this at home, kids. Genocide, bioterrorism, and crimes against humanity. The Americans have embarked upon a new kind of economic imperialism globally, and Russia is simply its newest target. The problem of the ruling elites in Washington is twofold. They know nothing about the world beyond their borders, and they know nothing about military power. So they badly miscalculated this war with Russia. They believed that victory would be theirs in 2 weeks or a max of 2 months, because Russia would collapse. This is a war that should have ended, because of horrific causalities taken by the Russians, and all we have to do is arm this proxy we built after 2014 and not get our hands bloodied. America established a government that would do their bidding, and this force would devastate Russia. Well, it did not quite work out like that, has it? Americans are not terribly interested in what goes on beyond their own country. Most cannot even tell you where the Ukraine is, or why they must provoke endless wars and globally atrocities. Most falsely believe that America could not do these things, or be behind some of the greatest and continuous global conflicts. Americans are still living with the belief that they have the moral high ground. Again, I repeat, America has become the new evil empire. The world was a much safer place after the Berlin Wall came down. Remember this. The Americans reduced their standing armies 40% and all military budgets by 50%, which should demonstrate that the America of that period had not secret dream of invading Russia. The superpowers took a deep breath and stepped back from the nuclear holocaust we were standing on for the previous 50 years. After all, what kind of people want war? However, the truth is, there are undeniably forces of actual evil which have taken over the corrupted souls of the dark techno-lords of Silicon Valley, and this new pseudo-puppet government in Washington, which stole the presidential election and conspired with the Chinese Communist Party to release the Wuhan China virus, the COVID-19 and murder millions and devastate the entire global economy. These are war crimes, plain and simple. America is the new Satin, the great lord of the darkness, who only wants to have a new global nuclear war conflict, which they are planning to stage right there in the American homeland. To put it simply, they want to depopulate the planet by literally creating a global holocaust. The new order they envision is dystopian, with only dark lords and slaves. All of you, my pathetic readers, will be long gone, dead and forever forgotten. America has a ruling class that is controlled by special interest groups, which all have agendas, and all we need to do is follow the money. We have all been distracted by the latest shiny object, our China balloon. Here the Americans send an F-22, the most expensive fighter in the world, and shoot a $400,000 missile to shoot down this balloon. The truth is, China has 300 satellites, which can read a license plate from space. The truth is, the complete mind-numbing, brainwashing, non-stop fake news is distracting us all from real issues, which the deep state wants to prevent us from thinking about. Wake up now. Does anyone actually have their critical thinking ability unfazed? Are we all hypnotized? Why do the Americans have 100,000 troops in Europe? Russia is not interested in invading Europe. Why are there 50,000 troops in Poland? Why are there no troops on the US southern border, protecting their country from the tens of thousands or millions of illegal border crossers? America was literally taken over by a rigged election. But the really big question is, who is really pulling the strings of this puppet government? How many Russian and Chinese are in America as agent provocateurs? America told Russia that they would not exploit their weakness and push the borders of NATO farther east. They lied, and Putin put up with it. Lithuania, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria. And then they started talking about Georgia and Ukraine, states that border Russia. Putin said that he would take actions to secure their borders. America spent a lot of money in the Ukraine since 2014, when they brought a government to power that was not duly elected. That government was ultimately led, cultivated by the people in Washington, which we believe did not expect Putin to do what he did. He said we can talk, but we cannot allow Ukraine to a part of NATO. And where did this guy Zelensky come from? An unknown comedian of dubious talent. He ran on a platform that wanted peace with Russia. He was voted into power on the peace platform and then did a complete 180 degrees and became the most ardent Russia hater. Also, Zelensky, when he was elected, could not speak a word of Ukrainian. He only spoke Russian. The problem was that all the neocon think tanks in the Beltway believed Russia could be bullied. Also, the reason Russia went into the Crimea, not because it was historically Russian, but it was that they did not want it to be turned into a NATO naval base on the Black Sea. There were reasons these actions were taken, but the people in Washington miscalculated. And consider this. Putin went into Ukraine and tried to minimize the casualties, the fake news said. See, Putin is weak. He did not want a war on the people. Look at the Russians. They did not do what the Americans did in Iraq by destroying everything that moved and flattened the entire country. No shock and awe. He's weak. This is complete bullshit. Of course not. That's not what he wanted. And as months and months pass and it becomes apparent that there is no one he can negotiate with, no one in Washington wants peace. He had to regroup and go on a full war footing. He would have to build up the armed forces. They are not going to negotiate with us. The sad part is that it was avoidable. The Ukraine army is decimated and recruiting 16-year-old boys to fight. TB tuberculosis is rampart in the snowy trenches. 75% of casualties are from artillery shells. Also, the idea that all these Euro countries are going to send the Ukrainians their best tanks is nonsense. They are only willing to give their old Leopard tanks, which brings the total to 88. This entire contingent could be 100% destroyed in an afternoon, in one volley of artillery. Bang! Warfare has dramatically changed in the last 30 years. It is not going to be dominated by armor on the ground as it once was. What dominates warfare now is intelligence, surveillance, and recognizance, ISR, linked to strike systems, rocket artillery, missiles, and conventional artillery. The Russians understand this. They were the first to recognize this back in the 1970s. Warfare has dramatically changed in the last 30 years. They will be vaporized in a few minutes. Also, infantry has to be there also. Armored fighting vehicles and lots of overhead protection. ISR strike dominates the battlefield. The Russians do not need to make some mad dash to Kiev or wherever. They in effect created a steamroller effect, moving slowly and deliberately under this umbrella of ISR. And they annihilated, disintegrated, automized, whatever force which stood in their way. And how many causalities have the Ukrainians had? I've heard 167,000 or 200,000 dead. Some say it's really 500,000 dead. No one is telling the truth in the West. You can only find out by people on the ground. And the Americans are not prepared to go to war today. They don't have munitions. The Russians do. They have the capacity to fire 60,000 missile rounds a day, including rockets and missiles. The Russians are conserving these. Today there are 750,000 men surrounding the Ukraine and preparing for a new offensive, which is coming. Of that number, probably 200,000 to 250,000 are combat forces. There are between 18 to 22 million Ukrainians left in the territory. More than 10 million have left the country. America is killing the Ukrainian state. And unfortunately, this was inevitable. The Americans refused to consider neutrality in the Ukraine, as they had for decades in Austria. The Americans know they are not prepared to go into a war with Russia. They are a predominantly aerospace and maritime power. Ideally, the Americans would like to meet their enemy in the mid-Atlantic or the mid-Pacific. Also, the American army is incredibly small and pitifully incapable to accomplish what would it be required to do. The other truth that is hiding in front of us is that this will destroy NATO. Behind the scenes in Europe, people are asking the same questions. What are we doing? What have we got ourselves into?